The most elegant restaurant in town was packed that night. Between glasses of wine and exquisite dishes, a wealthy client made a point of reminding everyone that money buys everything, even the right to complain loudly. But what he didn't know was that the dish he was about to criticize had been prepared especially for him, by someone that fate would put back in front of him at the most unexpected moment. If you believe that respect is the true spice of life, leaves the like. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because here in Dark Karma Stories, every meal comes with a lesson served hot. The restaurant house of Leoit was the kind of place where silence was as valuable as luxury. The low lights, crisp white tablecloths, and the distant sound of a piano created an almost sacred atmosphere, as if time moved slowly within. It was Saturday night, and every table was reserved. Elegant couples, businessmen in tight ties, and wealthy families filled every corner of the room. Behind the counter, the waiters moved with precision, as if dancing a silent choreography. The air smelled of fresh basil, red wine, and a hint of Sicilian lemon. And in the center of it all, a man with a polite smile and a serene gaze coordinated every detail. Henry, the restaurant manager. Everything was going well until a loud voice cut through the air, breaking the harmony like a plate falling to the floor. "This is horrible," shouted a man in a blue suit, pushing the plate forward. All eyes turned. The client, Eduardo Salgado, was known around town. A millionaire businessman, accustomed to being the center of attention, and never being wrong. Beside him, his wife maintained a tight smile, clearly embarrassed. Enrique approached calmly. "Is there something wrong with the dish, sir?" Eduardo snorted. "Problem? It's bland, cold, and the presentation a disaster. I can ask the kitchen to remake it." "Remake it?" He laughed sarcastically. "You better teach your chef how to cook properly. I'm paying too much to eat that." The words echoed through the room. Some customers looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched curiously, the typical spectacle of those who confuse wealth with reason. Enrique took a deep breath. "I understand, sir. I'll take care of it immediately." As he collected the plate, he noticed something strange. Eduardo's wife's gaze. She didn't look angry. She looked sad. "Sorry about him," he whispered softly as the manager passed by. "He thinks respect is on the menu." Enrique just nodded discreetly and took the plate to the kitchen. Inside, the heat and noise were intense. Pots clinked, and the smell of olive oil and garlic filled the air. Behind the stove, a tall, silent figure concentrated on finishing a risotto. It was Rafael, the head chef, reserved, perfectionist, and respected by the entire team. Enrique placed the plate on the counter. "We have an unhappy customer." Rafael looked up. "The one at table 4. Himself." The chef looked at the returned dish, almost intact. "What did he say?" "Which is horrible." Rafael was silent for a few seconds. His expression was firm, but his eyes held something deeper. "This dish was prepared by me." Henry nodded. "I figured. Do you want me to do it again?" "No," the chef replied quietly. "I want to bring it to the table myself." The manager hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I have." Rafael wiped his hands on his apron, straightened his coat, and picked up another plate. Identical to the previous one, but prepared with even more care. As he walked into the dining room, the sound of silverware clanging faded. It was as if the entire restaurant sensed something was about to happen. Eduardo, distracted, chatted loudly about investments and luxury cars, without imagining what was to come. Rafael stopped in front of the table and gently placed the new plate. "Good evening, sir. I made a point of preparing this personally. I hope it's up to par." Eduardo looked at the man with disdain. "Oh, so you're the chef?" "Yes." "Well, you should be grateful. It's with demanding clients like me that you learn to improve." Rafael kept his gaze calm. "Thank you, sir. But some lessons are learned without having to humiliate anyone." The entire room fell silent. Eduardo's wife lowered her gaze. The businessman gave a short laugh. "Funny. You sound nice for someone who lives behind a stove." The chef tilted his head slightly. The stove, sir, is a mirror. It shows who cooks, with soul, and who just serves as an example to others. Enrique, from a distance, watched the scene intently. There was tension in the air, but also something larger, a balance about to shift. Eduardo picked up the fork, tasted the dish, and stopped. The flavor surprised him. The seasoning was perfect, the rice creamy and just right. But pride wouldn't let him admit it. Okay, acceptable, he murmured. Rafael just smiled discreetly. I'm glad. It was prepared with much more than ingredients. And then, without anyone noticing, he left a small folded note next to the plate. When he left, the hall seemed to breathe again. Eduardo, curious, opened the note. There it was, written in firm handwriting. Some dishes are served hot, others are served cold, but the taste of respect. Time never grows cold. He stood still. His hardened gaze began to waver, and for the first time that night, arrogance gave way to silence. Eduardo stood still, staring at the note on the table. The simple yet sharp words seemed to pierce through the wall of arrogance he wore as armor. The taste of respect. Time never cools. For a moment the sound of the piano and the voices in the restaurant disappeared. The businessman, accustomed to dominating meetings, contracts, and people, found himself disconcerted. His wife, Claudia, watched in silence, trying to decipher his expression. What is it? He asked in a whisper. Nothing, Eduardo replied too quickly. A silly message. But it wasn't silly. It was uncomfortable. Something about that handwriting seemed familiar, but he couldn't figure out why. Enrique, the manager, approached discreetly. Is everything okay, sir? Eduardo forced a smile. Yes, perfect. But the tone betrayed the discomfort. When dinner was over, he hurried out without comment. His wife politely said goodbye as he walked toward the parking lot, the crumpled note still in his hand. Inside, Rafael watched him through the kitchen window. There was no anger in his gaze, just a kind of serenity that only those who understand fate can have. That same night, Rafael stayed late at the restaurant. He washed his hands, took off his apron, and leaned against the marble countertop. Enrique appeared, crossing his arms. You knew who he was, didn't you? Rafael nodded. I knew. Want to tell me? The chef took a deep breath. I worked for him 7 years ago. The manager frowned. Like this? Before I came here, I was the Salgado family's private cook, he explained calmly. I prepared his meals every day. Enrique leaned against the wall, intrigued. And what happened? Rafael lowered his gaze. One day, his son, little Arthur, came into the kitchen. He was curious and liked to tinker with the pots and pans. Eduardo appeared, shouting, saying that this was no place for children or servants. He paused, his voice breaking. I defended the boy. I said that the kitchen is the heart of the home, and that everyone has the right to learn the value of work. And him? Asked Enrique, already imagining the answer. He fired me on the spot, the chef replied. He said I'd never be more than a man who smelled of spices. Silence fell over the kitchen. Henry took a deep breath. And now he ate a dish made by you. Rafael smiled slightly. Fate has a curious taste, don't you think? The next day, the rain fell lightly over the city. Edward entered the office early, but he couldn't concentrate. The note he'd tried to throw away seemed to haunt him. It was there, in the trash, but his mind repeated it like an echo. The taste of respect. Time never cools. Around noon, he picked up his cell phone and called the restaurant. Henry answered. Boa tarde, House of Leo. This is Eduardo Salgado. Yes, sir. How can I help you? I would like to know the chef's full name. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. May I know the reason? Just curious. Henry hesitated but replied. Chef Rafael Moretti. Eduardo froze. The name struck him like a forgotten memory. Old images began to form in my mind. The sound of pots and pans, the smell of home-cooked food, and the face of a smiling younger man teaching his son how to chop vegetables in the kitchen at home. Rafael. he murmured. The memory came like a blow. Cooking is an act of love, Arthur. One day, you'll understand. Get out of there, boy! Eduardo's voice echoed in his memory. That's a servant's job, not yours. The memory made him shudder. Back then, he prided himself on being a businessman, a provider. He never realized that by trying to teach hierarchy, he had taught contempt. And now, the same man he had humiliated had prepared his meal with respect. Regret began to creep in like a cold tide. Eduardo hung up the phone and stood still, staring out the window. The city outside continued its rhythm, indifferent, but inside him, something was changing. As if the distant sound of a pot bubbling reminded him of what he had lost, humanity, in the midst of luxury. At the restaurant, Rafael also thought about the past. Henry approached. Do you think he will remember you? Rafael smiled. I don't know. But if you remember, I hope you remember what I said to his son. What? That cooking is serving with love. And that love is the only seasoning that can't be bought. Enrique was silent, absorbing the words. Outside, the wind blew the window curtains, and the aroma of the night's dinner began to fill the air. Rafael looked at the lit fire and murmured, as if speaking to destiny, that the dish was served at the right time. 2 days have passed since dinner, but for Eduardo, it seemed that the taste of that night was still stuck in his palate. Not the risotto, but the embarrassment. That phrase on the note came back to mind in every quiet moment. The taste of respect. Time never cools. He tried to distract himself with meetings, reports, and shallow conversations, but regret grew silently, like a deep ache. It wasn't just about complaining about the food. It was about something much bigger, about realizing I'd lived a lifetime confusing arrogance with authority, money with value. On Wednesday night, after leaving the office, he drove aimlessly. The city blinked in yellow lights, and the distant sound of rain echoed on the windshield. Without realizing it, he parked in front of the house of Leo. He stood in the car for a few seconds. The restaurant gleamed with the same elegance as before. But now it felt different, as if the place held a truth he had yet to hear. He took a deep breath, turned off the engine, and got in. Enrique, the manager, was the first to recognize him. Good evening, Mr. Eduardo. Welcome back. Good evening, he replied in a lower tone than usual. Is everything okay with the chef? The manager hesitated. Yes, it is. Would you like a table? Only if he's here. Enrique nodded and went to the kitchen. Inside, Rafael was concentrating on assembling a dish, his eyes fixed on the details. Rafael, the manager said calmly. He's back. The chef paused for a moment, wiped his hands, and took a deep breath. So fate hasn't finished dinner yet. In the hall, Eduardo waited, sitting at the same table as the other night. Restless hands, gaze lost in the void. When Rafael appeared, walking with a firm posture and a serene look, the room seemed to hold its breath. The two stared at each other. Neither spoke for a few seconds, until Eduardo broke the silence. I didn't know it was you. Rafael just nodded. Life has a curious way of bringing people back to the table. Eduardo lowered his head. I was an idiot, he confessed. 7 years ago, and again now. Rafael sat across from him. No arrogance, just humanity. We all serve something, Mr. Salgado. Some serve food, others serve their egos. The problem is that the second course never feeds anyone. The businessman gave a nervous smile. You're right. I always thought respect was something you bought with status. He paused, his eyes welling up. And I ended up losing the respect of the people who mattered most. Of your son? Rafael asked gently. Eduardo took a deep breath. Yes. Arthur walked away. He said I only knew how to teach by shouting. The chef watched him for a moment. He was a good boy. He had a light heart. He loved to learn. Eduardo looked up, surprised. Do you remember? Of course. He loved seeing the rice change color, the smell of the oil. He said he wanted to cook with me one day. Eduardo smiled, but the smile was sad. He cooks now. He opened a small bistro in the North Zone. He never invited me to come. Maybe I still will, Rafael replied calmly. Sometimes forgiveness also needs time to simmer. The silence that formed between them was different, not tense, but reflective. Eduardo moved the napkin in his hands as if seeking courage. I came here to apologize. No need, the chef replied. I didn't hold a grudge, but I should have, the businessman insisted. I was cruel, arrogant, and I was patient, Rafael interrupted gently, because time teaches what pride prevents us from learning. Eduardo lowered his head. Tears began to fall discreetly. You know what hurts the most? He said, his voice trembling. I've spent so much time bossing people around, I've forgotten what it's like to listen. Rafael looked him in the eyes. Silence teaches more than power, Mr. Salgado. Power feeds the ego. Silence feeds the soul. Eduardo took a deep breath, trying to contain his tears. You prepared that dish especially for me, didn't you? Rafael nodded. I prepared it. Why? Because I thought you could still taste what you lost. The businessman smiled slightly, wiping his eyes. And listen. Then the dish fulfilled its purpose, replied Rafael. Enrique watched from afar discreetly, realizing that what was happening there was not just a reunion, it was a settling of scores between two souls. After a long silence, Eduardo stood up. Thank you for having me. Everyone deserves a second chance, Rafael said, even those who complain about the spice of life. Edward extended his hand, and the two shook. I'll visit Arthur tomorrow, said the businessman, and I promise, this time I'll just listen. Rafael smiled. Then this will be the most beautiful dish you will ever taste. Eduardo smiled back and left. The doorbell echoed, and the soft sound of the piano filled the hall again. Rafael stood there, staring at the empty table. The lesson was served, he murmured, and the customer finally understood the flavor. The next day dawned with a gray sky, a harbinger of rain. Eduardo woke up earlier than usual. His head was still buzzing with Rafael's words. Time teaches what pride does not allow us to learn. He looked in the mirror. The reflection showed a different man, not because of his aged face, but because of his tired eyes. For years he'd worn success like armor. Today, for the first time, he felt the weight of having overused it. He got into his car and drove silently through the still damp streets. In the passenger seat was a small box wrapped in red ribbon. Inside, a new apron. The kind of gift that wasn't expensive but carried a meaning he hoped his son would understand. The GPS indicated the destination, Bistro Aurora. The name sounded familiar and symbolic. Aurora, the dawn of a new day. As he parked, he saw the small restaurant on the corner, simple but cozy. The facade was hand-painted, and the window in delicate letters read, "Cooking is serving love." Eduardo stood there for a few seconds before the sentence. It was exactly what Rafael said to little Arthur so many years ago. The heart sank. He entered slowly. The sound of light music filled the room. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the gentle scent of herbs and sauce. Behind the counter, a young man in a black apron and a discreet smile was organizing dishes. Eduardo swallowed hard. Arthur? The boy looked up, surprised. For an instant, time froze. The two stared at each other, father and son, now separated by 7 years of silence. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to maintain his posture. Okay? Eduardo nodded, moved. I came to see you. The silence was heavy, not with anger, but with old hurt. The young man crossed his arms. I thought you had more important things to take care of. I did, the father replied sincerely. But I realized that nothing was more important than being here. Arthur looked away, fiddling with a dish towel. What do you want, father? Eduardo took a deep breath. I want to prove what you do, and I want to apologize for what I never knew how to do. Listen to you. The sentence made the air change. Arthur stopped. His eyes filled with tears, but he stood his ground. Do you know how many times I tried to show you what the kitchen was like for me? How many times did you tell me to stop because you said, this was no life for a Salgado? Eduardo lowered his head. I know, and each of those times, I lost a little more of you. The young man watched him carefully, looking for any sign of falsehood. But there wasn't. For the first time, the father didn't speak like a businessman, nor like a powerful man. He spoke like someone naked with vanity and full of regret. Arthur took a deep breath. Sit down, he said finally. I'll make you something. Eduardo sat in silence, his heart pounding. He watched his son move around the kitchen with precision, cutting, stirring, experimenting. The way he cooked reminded me of someone. The same focused look, the same calm, the same love in the gesture. When the dish was ready, Arthur brought it to him. It's simple. Mushroom risotto with truffle oil. It was the first dish I learned to make. Eduardo swallowed hard. Who did you learn from? With Rafael, the son replied without hesitation. He taught me when I was a child. He said that the taste of food is like that of people. It improves when it's sincere. The businessman closed his eyes, trying to contain his emotion. He picked up the fork, tasted the dish, and in the first second, the tears came. The taste was the same one that had surprised him at Casa di Leone. But now there was something different, the taste of forgiveness. It's perfect, he said, his voice trembling. Better than anything I've ever eaten. Arthur smiled slightly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. It's not the dish, Dad. It's the moment. Eduardo looked up, tears falling freely. I didn't come here to judge you, son. I came to learn, and to tell you that I'm proud of the man you've become. Arthur took a deep breath. The silence between them, for the first time in years, didn't hurt. He walked up to his father and hugged him. It was a long, heavy embrace, full of everything that was trapped in time, and at the same time, light, like the steam that rises from the pot when the water finally boils. Outside, the rain began to stop. The sun appeared between the clouds, gilding the restaurant's sign. Aurora, a new beginning. Eduardo looked at his son and smiled. You know, Arthur, I think I finally understand what a special dish is. What is it? Asked the young man. The one that life serves when we let our pride cool. They both laughed, and for the first time in a long time, father and son shared a meal, not as customer and cook, but as what they always should have been, family. The sun was already beginning to set when the lights of the Aurora Bistro, they lit softly, casting a warm glow across the brick walls and the aroma of baking bread. Arthur cleaned the counter with a damp cloth, while Eduardo, still there, watched the movement in the kitchen with a calm he hadn't felt in a long time. The two had spent hours talking. They talked about everything, their childhood, their fights, their absences, and even the good memories that time couldn't erase. There was a lightness in the air, as if life had finally decided to serve dessert after a long, bitter dinner. Arthur looked at his father, who was smiling discreetly. It's funny, said the young man. When I was little, you used to say that restaurants were for people without ambition. Eduardo laughed, without irony. And I was wrong. Today I see that it takes a lot of courage to live with love and patience. I only knew how to live in a hurry. The boy nodded, satisfied with the answer. But before he could say anything, the doorbell rang. A man in a dark jacket entered, carrying a calm expression and a look that seemed to observe the environment as if he had known the place for a long time. Rafael Moretti. Arthur was the first to recognize him. Chef? He exclaimed, smiling. What a surprise. Eduardo turned around and froze. Fate, once again, had decided to serve the dish cold at exactly the right time. Rafael smiled discreetly. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I came to check out the famous bistro everyone's talking about. Arthur ran to greet him with a hug. You taught me how to cook, remember? The young man said. Everything I know started with your risotto. I remember, yes, Rafael replied, a sparkle in his eyes. And seeing what you've built here is the best payment a teacher could receive. Eduardo remained silent, watching the two. He felt a mixture of admiration and shame. It was like seeing, before him, the bridge between past and present. and realizing that he had nearly destroyed it out of pride. Arthur looked at his father. "Dad, this is Rafael, the man who prepared your dinner at Casa di Leone." "I know," the businessman replied calmly, "and that's why I'm happy to see you here." Rafael approached, extending his hand. "Good evening, Mr. Salgado." Eduardo held his hand firmly. "Good evening, Rafael. I think fate wanted us to share another dinner." The chef smiled. "Fate is a patient cook. It knows just the right point for things." Arthur, curious, looked at the two. "Did you already know each other?" Rafael nodded. "Many years ago. I worked for your family." The young man's eyes widened. "Really? So you were the one who taught me my first risotto?" "Exactly," Rafael replied. "And it was your enthusiasm that made me believe that cooking was still worth it." Eduardo watched that scene as if he had finally seen the truth. The respect he had once denied was now returning multiplied. Arthur smiled. "Since you're here, come have dinner with us." "I'd love to," Rafael replied. "But only if it's your dish that comes from the kitchen." Arthur laughed. "Then I'll prepare something special." As the young man disappeared behind the kitchen door, the two men were left alone. The silence that formed between them was no longer heavy. It was one of understanding. Eduardo was the first to speak. "I should have listened to you 7 years ago. Sometimes people only learn when life changes its flavor," Rafael said lightly. "And you didn't hold a grudge?" "No," the chef replied. "Because resentment is like too much salt. It ruins any dish." Eduardo smiled, gratitude in his eyes. "You know, Rafael, I used to think that commanding people was about power, but today I understand that it's about service. And serving is the most difficult verb of all," the chef added, "because it requires humility and patience to wait for the right moment to be understood." Arthur returned with the plate in his hands. The aroma of fresh herbs and white wine spread through the room. "Parmesan risotto with a touch of Sicilian lemon," he announced. "It's the same one you made for me, chef." Rafael smiled, moved. "So now it's my turn to prove what you learned." The three sat down. For a moment time seemed to stand still. The sound of the light rain, the smell of food, the glow of lights reflecting off the bowls. Everything formed a scene of reconciliation and destiny. Arthur served them both, and everyone ate in silence, just exchanging looks that said more than words. When he finished, Rafael placed his fork on his plate and took a deep breath. "Perfect. You've learned not only how to cook, Arthur, but how to forgive." The young man smiled, his eyes filled with tears. "I think you do too." Eduardo looked at the two of them, moved. "What you did to me made me understand that respect is not taught by shouting, but by example." Rafael raised the cup. "Then let us toast," he said, "to the rarest dish in the world." Arthur laughed. "Which?" "The plate of forgiveness." The glasses clinked softly, the crystal-clear sound echoing through the hall. Outside, the rain stopped, and the sky opened up, revealing the first stars of the night. And in that little corner bistro, 3 different lives crossed paths again, united by something simple, yet eternal, the taste of change. The following days were calm. The Aurora bistro flourished, and destiny, satisfied, seemed to finally rest. But Eduardo couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something to be done, something that might somehow turn regret into gratitude. Since reuniting with Rafael and Arthur, he spent every afternoon discreetly helping out at the bistro. He cleaned tables, greeted customers, and carried boxes. The old commanding habits seemed to have disappeared. Now he listened, learned, and smiled. Rafael watched from afar, impressed by the change. "He's really trying," he commented to Arthur as he chopped vegetables. The young man nodded. "My father was always tough, but I never saw him like this. Gentle." Rafael smiled. Sometimes humility is the ingredient that destiny takes the longest to serve. That afternoon, Eduardo approached the two with a determined look in his eyes. "I have an idea," he said. "I want to organize a special dinner here at Aurora." Arthur raised his eyebrows. "An event?" "Yes, but not for businessmen or politicians. I want it to be for people who could never afford a meal like that." The two looked at each other surprised. "A charity dinner?" Rafael asked. "Exactly," the businessman replied. "I'll cover everything, ingredients, drinks, decorations. But I want the kitchen to be yours." Arthur smiled. "And who are we going to invite?" Eduardo looked out the window. Across the street, a woman was collecting cans, while a child waited nearby. "Everyone the world forgot to serve." Rafael nodded, moved. "Then it will be the redemption dinner. Preparations have begun." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Bistro Aurora will serve a free dinner to needy families. Many thought it was a marketing ploy, others, a legend. But what no one imagined was the real reason behind the initiative, the silent regret of a man who, one day, refused the most important dish in life: empathy. The day before the event, the kitchen was pure energy. Arthur coordinated the assistants, Rafael supervised the details, and Eduardo, wearing a white apron and a smile on his face, chopped vegetables under the proud gaze of his son. "I never thought I'd see you cutting onions," Arthur joked. Eduardo laughed. "Neither do I, but in a way I deserve every tear." Rafael joined in the fun. The difference is that this time the tears don't burn, they heal. The clock struck 7 o'clock when the doors opened. Humble people, some homeless, others with children in their arms, entered timidly, as if they could not believe what they were seeing. The tables were set with flowers, candles, and white tablecloths. The aroma of fresh food filled the air. Eduardo greeted each person at the door, shaking hands, greeting them, and offering a sincere smile. No cameras, no reporters, just the sound of cutlery, laughter, and human warmth. Rafael and Arthur left the kitchen with the first dish. It was the same mushroom risotto, the dish that had started the whole story. Rafael placed the platter on the central table and looked at Eduardo. "Would you like to advertise the dish, Mr. Salgado?" Eduardo nodded, but humbly. "There's no sir today," he replied. "Today I'm just another waiter." He stood up in front of everyone and began to speak. "A few months ago, I was a man who thought respect came with a price. That education was for those who deserved it, and that the world revolved around my success." He paused, his voice breaking. "Today I learned that respect can't be bought, it can be served, and that the greatest luxury in life is being able to start over with dignity." The hall filled with applause. Rafael came closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just start over, Eduardo. You took a breath." Arthur brought a small handmade plaque and placed it on the main wall. It said, "This dinner is dedicated to everyone who was once left out of the table. Today, everyone has a place." People ate, laughed, cried. Some, through tears, thanked him. Eduardo served dish after dish, and with each smile he received, he felt the weight of the past dissolve. When dinner was over, the restaurant was silent. The tables are empty, but the hearts are full. Rafael looked at Eduardo and said, in a low tone, "Now, yes, the special dish has been served." Eduardo smiled. And this time, no one complained about the food. The morning after dinner, the sun rose differently, calmer, warmer, as if even the sky had decided to bless what had happened the night before. The Aurora Bistro was silent. All that remained were the stacked dishes, the sweet smell of basil, and the memories of a night no one would forget. Eduardo arrived early. He wore the same white apron, but what he carried on his face wasn't tiredness. It was peace. As she collected the wilted flowers from the tables, she saw flashes of the previous night in her mind. The smiles of the children, the sparkle in the mother's eyes, the light laughter of those who had not sat at the table with dignity for a long time. Arthur appeared, still with his messy hair and shy smile. "Dad, we did something beautiful, didn't we?" Eduardo stopped and looked at him. "No, son, you did something beautiful. I just served." Arthur laughed, but his eyes were teary. "I think Rafael was right. Respect is the spice that changes the flavor of the world." As they talked, the sound of footsteps echoed along the sidewalk. Rafael appeared at the door carrying the day's newspaper in his hands. "Have you seen this?" he asked, placing the newspaper on the counter. On the cover, a headline occupied the top. One dinner, 100 smiles. The restaurant that served you. Respect. Below, a photo showed Eduardo serving an elderly lady with a genuine smile. Arthur was speechless. But we didn't call the press. No need, Rafael replied. Someone who was here recorded it and posted it. The video went viral. Eduardo frowned. Did it go viral? Yes, the chef continued. Since last night, the networks have been full of messages. People telling similar stories, restaurants wanting to replicate the idea. You're spreading the word. Arthur opened his cell phone and started reading the comments. This video made me cry. I own a small cafe and I want to do the same in my city. My father never apologized to me, but seeing this man serve gave me hope. Silence filled the place for a moment. Eduardo sat down, moved. I never wanted to show off. I just wanted to give something back to the world. Rafael smiled, and he gave it back. But the world decided to give back. In the following days, something extraordinary began to happen. Cafes, bakeries, restaurants and snack bars in various neighborhoods began to organize nights of respect, free dinners for people in vulnerable situations. Some put up posters inspired by the phrase that now graced the wall of Bistro Aurora. Today, everyone has a seat at the table. Social media was filled with photos of smiling chefs, applauding customers, and volunteers humbly serving. The gesture of a man who previously complained about the spice of life had become a national movement. A local reporter went to the bistro to interview Eduardo. Did you expect this repercussion? He smiled shyly. No. But I've learned that when repentance is genuine, it has a scent the world recognizes. The reporter noted, impressed. And what do you feel seeing so many people inspired by your gesture? Eduardo thought for a moment before answering. Gratitude. Because I discovered that serving is a silent way of asking for forgiveness. The interview was broadcast that night. Within hours, more messages arrived, some from people who had been fired, humiliated, forgotten. They all said the same thing. Seeing you serving made me want to start over. Rafael and Arthur watched the report together. The chef placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. See, Arthur, sometimes the dish we prepare isn't for the one eating it. It's for the one watching. Arthur smiled, and the flavor remains in the soul. The following week, the restaurant received a letter with no return address. Eduardo opened it carefully. Inside, there was just a sheet of paper and a handwritten sentence. Thank you for showing that respect is still the best spice of humanity. Next to the letter, a small medal with the inscription, Serving is an act of love. Eduardo took a deep breath and looked at the two men that fate had placed in his life. Do you think the world really changes? He asked. Rafael responded calmly. The world doesn't change all at once, Eduardo. It changes from table to table. Arthur smiled. So, bring on the next ones. The sun shone through the window and illuminated the restaurant sign, where a new sign now shone. Bistro Aurora, where respect is the dish of the day. And as the aroma of dinner once again spread through the street, Eduardo felt that finally he had paid the only bill that really mattered, the account with one's own conscience. The sun was already setting when Rafael entered the Aurora Bistro with a golden envelope in his hands. Arthur and Eduardo were finishing, closing the cash register when they saw him enter, his face serene, but with a different sparkle in his eyes. I brought you something, said the chef, placing the envelope on the table. Arthur wiped his hands on his apron and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter printed on letterhead and a red ribbon across the top. The young man read aloud, The National Gastronomy Association has the honor to invite you, Rafael Moretti, Arthur Salgado and Eduardo Salgadotto, participate in the annual Flavors that Transform ceremony. The event will honor people who have used cooking as an instrument of social change. Arthur was speechless. Dad, they're calling us. Eduardo looked up, surprised. Us? I'm not a chef. Rafael smiled. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes the most delicious lesson doesn't come from the one who cooks, but from the one who changes. Eduardo held the envelope in disbelief. I don't deserve this. Yes, you do, the chef replied. Because you didn't just taste a dish, you learned what it meant. Days later, the three traveled together to the capital. It was the first time Eduardo had been away from work in years. But oddly enough, he didn't miss the meetings or the glass walls of the office. In the car, the atmosphere was light. Arthur talked about new recipes. Rafael commented on the event, and Eduardo just listened, smiling. It was as if, for the first time, he understood the pleasure of listening rather than commanding. When they arrived at the convention center, the scene was imposing. Lights, cameras, renowned chefs, businessmen, and journalists. But amidst all the glitter, the trio drew attention for another reason: their simplicity. During the ceremony, several awards were presented. Stories of overcoming obstacles, of community kitchens, of young people who used gastronomy to transform lives. But when the presenter took the stage with the last envelope, silence fell over the auditorium. And the award for Inspirational Story of the Year goes to, he opened the paper, the Aurora Bistro, for teaching the country that respect is the spice that changes the world. The audience burst into applause. Eduardo, Rafael, and Arthur looked at each other, stunned. Arthur was the first to get up. "Come on, Dad," she said, holding his hand. They went on stage under a shower of lights and applause. Rafael received the microphone, but before speaking, he looked at the two beside him and made a gesture of gratitude. This story began with a plate of risotto and a mistake, he said, looking out at the audience. A mistake that turned into regret, and a regret that turned into hope. The audience fell silent, attentive. Mr. Eduardo Salgado, Rafael continued, taught me something I never forgot. Sometimes the greatest learning comes not when we get it right, but when we have the courage to admit our mistakes and change the flavor of our own lives. The applause grew louder. Eduardo wiped his eyes, overcome with emotion. When he received the microphone, he took a deep breath. I'm not a chef, nor a hero. I was just a man blinded by his own vanity. He paused. But one day fate served me a special dish, and in it came a seasoning I didn't know. Humility. The entire auditorium rose to its feet. This award, he continued, is not mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever served with their heart, even when they were treated as invisible. It's for every waiter, every cook, every person who understands that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. Arthur hugged him, and the audience responded with a standing ovation. The stage lights reflected off the three's tears, creating a scene that looked like something out of a movie, but it was real life, served up in perfect timing. After the ceremony, reporters approached. Mr. Salgado, what is the secret to changing the world? Eduardo smiled. No secret, just one dish at a time. Rafael laughed. And may there never be a lack of seasoning for the soul. Arthur completed. Because respect, when it's true, is never off the menu. That night, back at the hotel, the three of them sat on the balcony, watching the illuminated city. The trophy rested on the table, reflecting the lights of the horizon. You know, Dad, said Arthur, if someone had told me a year ago that we would be here, I wouldn't have believed them. Neither do I, son, Eduardo replied. But I think it was fate that made this table reservation. Rafael raised his wine glass. Then let us toast him. To destiny, asked Arthur. No, said the chef, smiling, respectfully. The only dish that time doesn't spoil. The glasses clinked gently. Outside, the night wind blew lightly, carrying with it the distant scent of something fate was still cooking. Perhaps the next chapter in a story that began with arrogance, but ended with redemption. Months have passed since the Flavors That Transform event. But unlike most stories that fade with the lights of fame, the one about Rafael, Arthur and Eduardo Dunley grew, not in visibility, but in significance. The Aurora Bistro now, it was more than a restaurant. It had become a meeting point, an informal school of empathy and respect. People came from many cities to see the place where it all began. The small room with simple wooden tables and walls covered in notes left by customers from all over the country. In each ticket, a story. I brought my mother here for dinner. She's a maid and has always been treated like an invisible person. Today, She was served like a queen. I opened my first cafe. I put up a sign just like yours. Here, respect is the order of the day. I learned that humility is the spice we forget to use. Arthur kept each one carefully, saying they were the spices of the mural. He and Rafael maintained a simple routine, refusing million-dollar invitations and flashy interviews. The secret to the bistro's success wasn't on the menu. It was in the hearts of those who served. Eduardo, now with grayer hair, continued to help on Saturday afternoons. He was responsible for receiving customers and listening to their stories. He said it was his new office, the only one where people left richer than they entered. One morning, a school team visited the restaurant. Children aged 10 to 12 sat curiously, observing every detail. The teacher explained, "We are studying real stories about kindness, and Bistro Aurora was chosen as an example." Arthur was moved. While serving the small dishes, one of the girls asked, "Uncle, what is respect?" He smiled, thought for a moment, and replied, "Respect is when we treat others as we would like others to treat those we love." The girl nodded, and her eyes shone with understanding. At the back of the room, Rafael watched the scene, moved. Beside him, Eduardo smiled. "Look, Chef," he said, "now it's my son who teaches." "That's how legacy works, Eduardo," Rafael replied. "We teach one, and one teaches the world." As the months passed, the movement that began there continued to grow. Restaurants in different states have adopted the Project Open Table, inspired by the original charity dinner. Every month, one day was dedicated to offering free meals, accompanied by a handwritten note. The notes varied, but the message was always similar. You are important. Today, someone cooked with you in mind. Respect is the best spice of life. The press began calling the phenomenon the plate chain. But for Rafael, Arthur, and Eduardo, it wasn't a movement. It was just what the world should have always been: human. One afternoon, the trio received an unexpected visitor. A young man of about 20 came in shyly, holding a folded apron in his hands. "Do you remember me?" he asked. Rafael watched him carefully. "Your face is familiar to me. I came here with my mom to the charity dinner a year ago. I was that kid who didn't talk to anyone." Arthur smiled. "Yes, I remember. What now?" "Now I work at a community restaurant," the young man said, excited. "And I taught the chef how to make your risotto." The three of them looked at each other, and the silence that followed was the most beautiful kind of silence, the one that comes when the heart understands more than words. Eduardo stood up and placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Keep serving with your heart, son, because the food passes, but the gesture remains." The boy nodded, his eyes welling up. "That's what I learned from you." When he left, Rafael sighed deeply. "See, Eduardo?" "What?" "The tip that fate pays never comes in cash. It comes in moments like these." The three of them laughed as the sound of the pot bubbling filled the air. At night, when the movement ceased, Eduardo was alone for a few minutes in the living room. He looked at the bulletin board covered in notes and whispered, "If I have served even one person one day, it will have been worth it." Outside, the sign of the Aurora Bistro shone softly, reflected in the puddles of water in the street, and above it, a new poster made by Arthur. "Here, the main dish is humanity." Eduardo turned off the lights and left, with a serene smile. The night wind swayed the trees, and the distant sound of laughter echoed through the streets. The world wasn't perfect, but in that little corner, kindness was still being served hot, and the taste of respect was still alive. Time passed, as it always does. The seasons changed, customers came and went, and the Aurora Bistro remained firm, small, welcoming, with the same smell of warm bread and the same sound of the doorbell announcing each new story. But that morning, there was something different in the air. The sun streamed in through the glass windows, gilding the empty room, and the clock struck 8 when Rafael had arrived. It found Eduardo sitting at the corner table, apron folded, eyes lost in the coffee cup. "Is everything okay?" asked the chef. Eduardo smiled, tired but serene. "It is. I just thought it had been a while since I stopped to taste coffee, without rushing." Rafael sat down in front of him, It's a good sign. When we begin to savor the simple, it's because we've finally learned to live. Eduardo looked around. Did you know that in the beginning, I hated the smell of food? And now? Now, it is the scent of my peace. They both laughed. Arthur came in soon after, bringing the newspaper and the same enthusiasm as always. Dad, we're in the magazine again. They're calling Aurora the restaurant of the soul. Eduardo laughed, surprised. Of the soul? That's an exaggeration. No, it's not, Rafael replied. Food nourishes the body, but respect nourishes what comes after it. The young man placed the newspaper on the table and approached the two. I have an idea. Here it comes. Eduardo joked. I want to open a branch, but not to make money. I want to open it in a social shelter, to teach young people how to cook. Rafael and Eduardo looked at each other. Teaching to serve with the heart. The boy concluded. Eduardo smiled, his eyes filled with tears. So this is how the legacy begins. A few weeks later, the project Aurora Social became reality. An old abandoned warehouse was renovated with the help of volunteers and transformed into a school kitchen. On the walls, phrases that summarize the trio's philosophy. Cooking is serving. To serve is to respect. Respect is loving without asking for anything in return. Rafael taught the classes. Arthur coordinated the students, and Eduardo stood at the door, greeting each young person with a smile and a sincere welcome. Many of the students were children of people who had been at the benefit dinner years before. It was fate serving the same dish, now in larger portions. One afternoon, while the students were preparing dinner, Eduardo sat at the corner table, the same one he always sat at, and watched the action. Rafael noticed and came closer. How are you, my friend? Everything's great, he replied calmly. I was just thinking. He paused. Do you know what's missing from every dish, Rafael? What? The last ingredient. And what would that be? Eduardo smiled. Gratitude. Without it, everything loses its flavor. Rafael nodded, feeling the weight and truth in those words. But there was something different in that look. A farewell glow, a profound serenity. That night, dinner was beautiful. The students served with joy, the hall was full, and Eduardo watched from afar, with the same smile as when it all began. Rafael and Arthur called him to the main table, but he refused. Today, you are the ones who serve. I have already been served enough. The next day, the bistro opened as usual. But Eduardo didn't show up. Arthur was surprised, went to his house, and found him sitting on the porch, calm, with an empty cup in his hands and a serene smile on his face. The heart had stopped during the night. On the floor next to the chair was a small note, handwritten, in the same handwriting that had once left a message on a plate of risotto. Respect taught me how to live. Gratitude taught me to leave in peace. Arthur wept silently. Rafael, while reading, just closed his eyes. The last ingredient, he murmured. He served it all. Days later, the Aurora Bistro reopened in honor of Eduardo. On the main bulletin board, among the hundreds of tickets, a new sign glowed in the soft evening light. Dedicated to Eduardo Salgado, the man who learned that true success is serving with the heart. Rafael and Arthur continued together, teaching, cooking, and keeping alive the flame he lit. The movement grew even more, spreading the plate of respect to dozens of cities. And in every meal served, in every returned smile, there was an invisible touch of the man who once complained about the food, and ended up discovering the true taste of life. While the sign of the Aurora Bistro shone under the sunset, Rafael looked at Arthur and said, You know, son, respect can change a person. Arthur smiled. And love changes the world. Outside, the wind blew the curtains and the smell of food wafted through the street. Another dinner was being served, and with it, the legacy of a man who learned, late but in time, that life is only complete when the main course is respect, and the last ingredient, gratitude.